Right. So welcome everyone to What Makes a Movie a Christmas Movie. I am Liz, Derry Public Library's resident cinephile / movie expert. I don't think I'm the only one because we also have Jess. But I like to joke, Jess likes classy movies, whereas I also know a lot about garbage and exploitation and just general pop culture. So today we are going to be talking about Christmas movies, more accurately, kind of the new generation of Christmas films that we have, and the democratization of what makes a film a Christmas film. Couple of programming notes. A program that's just announced last week. We have the author of A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear. He is going to be here via Zoom on January 27th at 6:30. Very excited for that program. Very excited we were able to book him. We actually have a pretty full slate for January. We also have, I believe on the 20th, Steve Hale from Open World Explorers talking about winter backyard birds. And my program, film program for January of 2021 is going to be about the atomic age in cinema, specifically the fear of nuclear war, especially the Cold War, and how that was expressed. So we're going to go look at everything from Godzilla to the a very underrated film called Miracle Mile. And yes, we are going to be discussing bigs like Dr. Strangelove and The Day After, which, if you're not aware of this, is probably the most consequential made-for-TV film ever made. But for now, we're going to talk about things that are slightly happier because the threat of nuclear annihilation is never fun. We're going to talk about Christmas movies. So one moment, and I will get this started. One second. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what makes a movie a Christmas movie? I think we all have a pretty reasonable idea. Also, I love that this is giving me a red glow of what makes a movie a Christmas movie. So I am going to ask everyone to unmute themselves coming up because I am going to ask a question. So what is the first Christmas movie that you remember seeing? Anyone want to chime in?
It's a Wonderful Life.
All right. Anyone else? And question 2, do you have a favorite Christmas film?
Can I answer this too or no?
Oh, yes, you can.
I'm not sure if it's a Christmas film, but it's actually one I remember from a child and watching around Christmas. March of the Wooden Soldiers. I don't know if it's a Christmas movie. I love that movie. It's so stupid, but I love it. I loved it as a kid, so it's like something brings me back to my childhood.
Yeah, so we're actually going to get into this idea of you watched it when you were younger and it becomes a Christmas film for you. So if I had to answer mine, I think the first one that I remember seeing was probably the Charlie Brown Christmas Special or The Grinch. The Grinch actually has a very special place in my household. We joke that, that my dad is the Grinch because he can make the facial expressions of the cartoon character. But if I had to say a favorite Christmas movie, I am going to be a 90s kid cliche and say that I love The Nightmare Before Christmas. And that is an appreciation that has only grown as I've gotten older and can appreciate the animation and the music arrangement. So we're going to start off in terms of the Christmas movies that everyone knows and talks about with the typical Christmas films. So these are the ones where there's really no debate, because recently, if you've been online, there starts to be debate about what actually constitutes a Christmas movie. So movies like A Christmas Story, any version of A Christmas Carol, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, including that the Jim Carrey one, which I like to adhere to the we hate movies rule of it's okay to like a movie, but I am not a fan of the Ron Howard version. Charlie Brown Christmas, National Lampoon's White Christmas, Holiday Inn. Holiday Inn, a slightly controversial choice now because let's just say it was made in 1942 and there's a sequence in there that was okay then and not so okay now. We also have new classics like Elf. Jingle All the Way has become a full-fledged Christmas film, mainly because of people my age. And Speaking of it's okay to like a movie, but movies I'm not a fan of, Robert Zemeckis' The Polar Express. The big thing that you're going to notice with these, though, is that Christmas heavily features in these films. They revolve around Christmas. They're about Christmas, and they're usually released around Christmas as well, or somewhere within the vicinity of the, a 1 to 3 month period of that holiday. I actually remember being old enough to have the debate with classmates of, is The Nightmare Before Christmas a Christmas movie? And it always seemed a little silly question to me, because I'm like, Christmas is right in the title, you guys. I think that means something. But these are films where you're really not going to find too much of a debate. More the debate is going to be, is this movie good or not? Is this movie worth watching? Or if we're talking about The Polar Express, is this the most frightening animated film ever made or no? So if we're getting more of a gray area, I like to look at the kind of Christmas films. So these are movies that they may take place around Christmas, but Christmas is not the central part of the plot. A good example very recently is the Hulu film Happiest Season. It is ultimately a coming out story, but it takes place around Christmas. If you're not familiar with it, Kristen Stewart and Mackenzie Davis play a couple. They go to Mackenzie Davis's parents for Christmas. Mackenzie Davis says, "Oh, BT dubs, I'm not out to my parents, so you need to just be my friend." And comedy and drama ensue. But it's also kind of marketed as a Christmas movie, and it's marketed also as a LGBTQ movie. So kind of you have these films that can be both. Love Actually is probably, I would say, the most famous example of, it was originally marketed mainly as a romantic comedy with a very big cast. But as it took place around Christmas, a lot of people started to adopt it as a Christmas movie. And that actually goes to the point that Kevin had, where it's like, well, it's a movie I like to watch around this time. So for me, I always associate it with Christmas. But still, this is the one where we're kind of having an in-between. Even a film like Joyeux Noël, a great film, which is actually about the, it has a real-life inspiration with the 1914 Christmas truce. It's about a real-life historical event and is technically about Christmas. It's also a war movie, so it's that idea of like, how should we classify this? And as a librarian, I always kind of love that question of how is this classified? But this is the one where there's still a lot of people who say, oh, I watched this around Christmas. It has a Christmassy feel. So it's still, they're kind of accepted into the cultural Christmas canon. And what I've noticed, especially with the advent of the internet, is that, with stuff like Reddit, message boards, there is a democratization of what makes a Christmas movie, because back in the day, it used to be studios would make Christmas films. They would come out around November, December, and they were played around Christmas. Or if you had a television set, they were this was programming that was played around Christmas. Now we're having people say, well, personally, I think this movie is a Christmas film, which is how we're getting Die Hard in here. But before we get to Die Hard and how that has been rehabilitated as a Christmas film, I do think we need to talk about probably the most famous case of a film being rehabilitated as a Christmas movie. And that is Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. So a lot of people now will mention this as one of their favorite Christmas films. It's considered a Christmas classic. This was not a film that was intended to be a Christmas film despite the release date. It was based on a short story called The Greatest Gift, and it was really more about the idea of loss, but also feeling grateful for what you have. And especially this film coming out in 1946, what happened a year earlier? World War II ended, but we had about 4 years of American soldiers fighting overseas, witnessing, in many cases, fairly horrific things that they'd never seen before, coming back with PTSD and probably losing friends. And this was kind of made to give people a sense of hope amidst the sadness. And also, aside from World War II, we're also coming out of a depression. So this wasn't really made to be a Christmas movie as much as it was a film about general optimism. But it did not really do well when it was released, which surprises a lot of people. It actually got clobbered both financially and awards-wise by a film called The Best Years of Our Lives, which is a film about soldiers returning from World War II. And I'm actually going to say, for a film made in 1946, I think is a fairly raw and honest look at PTSD. I think before it was even called PTSD, I think it was still called shell shock at that point. You know, no disrespect to Best Years of Our Lives, but it is interesting that in terms of both the Christmas canon and the cultural canon, It's a Wonderful Life has had a far longer cultural life. So how did this become a Christmas classic? Well, basically the rights holders had no faith in this film. So in 1974, they let the rights lapse and it became a part of public domain. So TV stations who were trying to find anything for Christmas, because this is the 70s, people were just starting to show movies on TV, and it's hard to get the rights to movies. You have to pay for that. So you're like, oh, public domain, free Christmas programming. So it just became something that played around Christmas, and we have this kind of osmosis. This people watched this around Christmas, they associated it with Christmas, and it becomes one of the most beloved Christmas films of all time. There's actually a great quote from Frank Capra, where he says, quote, "It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen." And this is him talking to the Wall Street Journal about the film's revival. "The film has a life of its own now, and I can look at it like I had nothing to do with it. I'm like the parent whose kid grows up to be president. I'm proud, but it's just the kid that did the work. I didn't even think of it as a Christmas story when I first ran across it. I just liked the idea." So we kind of see, thanks to programming and television programming specifically, It's a Wonderful Life becomes a Christmas film for many people simply because of when it plays. Apparently, for a while, The Wizard of Oz was also played around Christmas. So there was a generation of people that considered The Wizard of Oz to be a Christmas movie, which I love The Wizard of Oz. I would never in my life consider it to be a Christmas movie, but that just shows how powerful the idea of seeing something around a certain point in time is. And that is how we are going to get to probably the most famous now Christmas discussion. Again, if you go on the internet, Die Hard. If you ever watch my Misinformation Busters episodes, you probably know that I genuinely or generally kind of think that the internet was a mistake as of right now, but it does give us sometimes fun gifts like the rehabilitation of Die Hard from action movie to a Christmas classic. So obviously not released around Christmas time, released in July of 1988, and this stars Bruce Willis as John McClane, who has to save his estranged wife from a hostage situation during a Christmas party. Christmas, I don't want to say barely factors in. There are a lot of fun sight gags with it, like the terrorist with the Santa hat on, there's the ho, 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 but really doesn't factor in. And it actually kind of started a little bit as mainly a contrarian thing for people being like, oh, I don't like those sissy Christmas movies, I like Die Hard. But for a lot of people, they grew up watching this and they grew up associating it with Christmas. So it has become for them a genuine Christmas film. And I do think it's kind of sweet that the creators are very on board with this. And I call it, and I don't think I'm the only person to do this, the first Christmas film of the internet. There's a great Guardian rundown on this where they interview a film historian named Matthew Sweet. And he talks about how the context of a film changes when people can share a single observation or a single image, and this is how the internet plays into it. And he says, films now have this other afterlife in tiny clips and GIFs, which, if you're not familiar, those are little animated clips on the internet. So a particular image from a film, like the dead terrorist in the Santa hat in Die Hard, can break free from the film and have a whole other life online, which might be its most vigorous form of life. And there we have it. Due to partial internet memery, it's basically memed into Christmas existence, and also a lot of people who grew up with Die Hard really appreciate it as an action film and are kind of like, again, potentially, depending on how old you were, there weren't a lot of Christmas films that really interested you, and you're like, this takes place around Christmas, I'll watch it. It then becomes a Christmas film to you. And don't think there's anything wrong with that. As we're going to see, much like the holiday itself, a Christmas movie is kind of what you make it. So we're going to move on to another Christmas film, and one that, while not marketed as a Christmas movie, I think is very overtly a Christmas film as opposed to Die Hard. And this is Joe Dante's fantastic Gremlins, also released in June, was a summer movie, but it takes place during Christmas. It starts with a Christmas song. It's all about Hoyt Axton, who's great in this movie, trying to get a gift for his kid, and he gets a little mogwai, which, you know, long story short, if you don't take care of it and follow the rules, bad things can happen. I look at this as the ultimate story of, you know, don't get your kid a pet for Christmas. It is not a toy. It is a lifelong responsibility. But it's great. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's a very black comedy. And there's a lot of, again, great Christmas sight gags. You know, Gremlins caroling. You have a great moment where the main character's mother fights off a gremlin, not only in her kitchen, but she fights another one off hiding in the Christmas tree. And she ends up throwing it into the fire. And that's also why I think this film is taken, that's why it's taken a while to be considered a Christmas movie, is because of the content. So when this movie came out, there was a lot of backlash from parents. This was a PG-rated film, and this was right before we had PG-13 as a rating. It was G, PG, and R. That was it. And parents were like, this is a violent and dark film for children. And I think that kind of led to, I think for at least like a good 20 years, the Christmas label not being put on it, because again, people don't like to put Christmas on a, you know, a movie with homicidal little gremlins, but kind of akin to Die Hard. People who grew up with this movie and grew up watching it were like, no, we absolutely accept this as a Christmas film. It also probably has one of the darkest Christmas stories ever, which, in case there are kids watching or listening, I'm not going to say exactly what it happens, but Phoebe Cates telling the story of how exactly she found out that Santa wasn't real. It's a horrifically sad, but also very funny story. Also, a minor note, this and Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom are often considered the films that created the PG-13 rating. That's kind of a misnomer. There was already a discussion in the rating community, MPAA, of like, we need to have something between R and PG. A film like, films like 9 to 5 actually caused a lot of discussion of we need an in-between. These two movies are more the movies that kind of really forced the hand in terms of this isn't quite PG and it's not quite R. Although, I mean, if we've all seen Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom, that one has, I think, the ultimate, this is PG scene, you know, Kalima with the heart. So on to, again, speaking of another film that was marketed towards children for reasons I cannot comprehend. Batman Returns. Yes, this is a Christmas film. There's a lot of people who will argue for it. Todd being one of them. Actually, once we're done, Todd, if you really want to plead the case, I will let you do so. So another summer blockbuster release. So this is the follow-up to Tim Burton's 1989 film, and I love the 1989 film. This is my Batman, and I actually love this movie too in terms of how it portrays Gotham. But this is a movie that, especially considering it had like McDonald's toy tie-ins, I'm like, this movie has way too much weird sexual energy to be geared towards children, and at the time, way too much weird sexual energy to be considered a Christmas movie. I'd like to think maybe if movies like Bad Santa have made it a little more acceptable for movies, Christmas movies, to have stuff like this in it. But it does take place around Christmas. The holiday factors into everything. There's actually a couple of great set pieces involving like the town Christmas tree, and a great moment of dark comedy with the Ice Princess finding a really hard-hitting way to light the Christmas tree. Tim Burton has kind of gone on record of like he considers Christmas to be kind of a dark holiday, and he's not entirely wrong. The origin of Christmas actually, if we're going back to the more pagan roots, is a lot darker than people would think. but he kind of likes to find the ghoulishness of the holiday. But at the end of the day, I think the reason this resonates with so many people, and from what I've seen written, is the fact that it's a Christmas movie that's sad, that there, you know, for a lot of people, Christmas might not always be the happiest time. There is alienation there. There are, you know, they may have lost family members, or there's people they can't connect with anymore. And this is kind of a very misfits Christmas, but at the end of the day, there's a sadness to it. Bruce is alone. He's never fully gotten over his parents' death, so Christmas is always a solitary experience for him. And that plays for another major character in this as well. Again, it's a sad reason that makes it a Christmas film, but when I see that justification, I'm like, I can actually kind of see it. If you've maybe had a couple of not so great Christmases in the past, one that has a bit more of a melancholy vibe can work. So we're going now to crime noir. Well, this is still kind of crime noir, but a very noir film, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. So this is written and directed by Shane Black, and we are going to see him come up a couple more times in this program. He is a huge fan of setting his films around Christmas. So this is a detective story that's set around Christmas Eve. Robert Downey Jr. is in this. Is actually right before he was an Iron Man. This was actually, Iron Man is his solidified comeback, but this was kind of his, oh, Robert Downey Jr.'s out of prison and he seems to have himself together again. Maybe we can cast him in things. So if you love the MCU and you love Tony Stark and you love Robert Downey Jr. in those movies, thanks Shane Black. So this came out in about 2005, around October, so kind of close to the holiday. The advertising didn't play up the Christmas connection, but there were a couple of people, especially the online community that really does like sort of the crime mystery type of movies. They kind of see this as like, hey, this is our genre's Christmas movie. And this is what we're kind of seeing, especially with fandoms, this idea of, we have our own Christmas movie now. We have, like, Batman fans, we have our own Christmas movie. And we're actually going to see with the next slide, anime fans, or as I affectionately call them because I am one of them, weebs, have a Christmas movie as well. Christmas in Japan is obviously very different from Christmas in the United States. They do not have the religious attachment to the holiday. I think only 1% of Japan is Christian. Majority of their faith there is Buddhist or Shinto. Shinto is their indigenous religion. And there actually was an entire period of time, I think it was the Tokugawa period, where Christianity was banned in that country. So kind of interesting history. The actually great film that deals with that is Martin Scorsese's Silence. But this is a film that deals with like both the secular end of Christmas, but actually the more religious end of Christmas as well. So it takes place in Tokyo, obviously, Tokyo Godfathers. Tokyo, when it's done up for Christmas, if you ever want to go like look at pictures, it looks like, I can't imagine what the electric bill is for that place. It's all done up in lights. Christmas there is all about lights. There's cake on the 25th, and apparently fried chicken is a thing for Christmas there too, which means I need to go there and celebrate Christmas immediately. But you also have, at the start of this film, at one of the few churches in Tokyo, you have these three homeless people who kind of formed a found family watching a nativity and, you know, getting the one meal they can get a day. And they then find a little bit later a child abandoned in a dumpster, and that sets off the film. They try to find the film's parents, and they kind of draw this coincidence of, it's Christmas, this must be a holy, like, blessed child. They actually name the baby Kyoko, which means, I think it's blessed child in Japan. And it's, I would say, other than Batman Returns, it's probably the heaviest of the Christmas films, because while this film is a lot of comedy, it is also directed by Satoshi Kon. If you're not familiar with Satoshi Kon, he is known as an animator of films that are fairly psychologically intense. He directed Perfect Blue, which I actually will say is the scariest animated film I've ever seen. And if you're a Darren Aronofsky fan, one of the both inspired A Scene in Requiem for a Dream. And there's a couple of visual shout outs in his film Black Swan. And he also directed a great film called Millennium Actress, which is based on Setsuko Hana. Unfortunately, Satoshi Kon is no longer with us. He died of cancer at age 42 in 2010. But this is considered probably definitely his lightest work, and also his most humane, because he's taking like homeless people who, I think regardless of where you go around the world, usually when they're portrayed in cinema, it's fairly derisive or one-dimensional. And it's kind of the idea of like, oh, they're lazy, or oh, they're mentally ill. And he gives these three characters very, fully fleshed out backstories, and you see why they're homeless. There's the character of Hana, who is a transgender woman. Her partner died, and due to how difficult it is just to live, she ends up losing her place. The young girl ran away from home. The older man is a gambling addict who kind of basically left his family because he's like, they don't need to deal with my problems. But there's also this idea of together they see this baby as a miracle, and they're like, we are going to go do this good thing. And they're the heroes of this film. And it also focuses a lot on coincidence, which you do find in Japanese films a lot, this idea of coincidences. And as it's Christmas, these coincidences become Christmas miracles. This actually is probably the least well-known of all the films I'll discuss tonight. Thankfully, that's changing because it just got new distribution in the United States. But if I had to recommend any movie heavily, it would be this one. It is, if you want a film that's truly about the more heartfelt part of the holiday season, it is Tokyo Godfathers. And you'll probably be as sad as I am because you're like, oh, the person who made this just, can't make movies like this anymore. So moving on to something a little bit more upbeat, Little Women. So this one was one that I did not know was considered a Christmas film until fairly early. I remember the 1994 version. I went to go see it in theaters. Came out in December, but I never remembered it being marketed as a Christmas film, probably because I was too young. I went back and watched all the adverts, and I'm like, man, they're laying the Christmas stuff on thick. And makes sense, because though Little Women does not take place all around Christmas, Christmas comes up a lot. And rather than focusing on the glitz of Christmas or kind of having it ironically set on Christmas, Little Women, both this film and Greta Gerwig's adaptation, which is fantastic if you've not seen it, they focus on the warmth of family around Christmas. And that's something, again, that I think a lot of people really latch onto. And going back to that idea of, I watched it as a kid around Christmas, this is a film, specifically the Gillian Armstrong version, because this had such a life on home video. There were a lot of people my age who grew up watching this around Christmas, and I think this has officially solidified it as a Christmas story, because there have been multiple adaptations of Little Women, but since the Gillian Armstrong version, the Greta Gerwig one too, they really laid on, in terms of the advertising and the distribution, on it being a Christmas film. The Greta Gerwig one did as well. I believe it was released on Christmas Day. But there were a lot of people who were like, oh, the Winona Ryder Little Women is my favorite Christmas film. I watched it all the time. So we're starting to see kind of a trend of, I watched this, therefore it's a Christmas movie. Moving on to Edward Scissorhands, another Tim Burton film. Once again, Tim Burton, 3 for 3 with making Christmas unsettling. This is one where I get Little Women. This is the one where I think it's a bit of a stretch, because mainly the third act and the beginning take place around Christmas, but a majority of the movie takes place in this sunny, clean, almost disturbingly, spotless suburbia, which is what Tim Burton was trying to kind of, satirize. But the final third act of the film all takes place during Christmas, and it actually does have a fairly nice end to the movie, because you find out the bookend of the film is Winona Ryder's character telling her granddaughter why it snows, and how before this one Christmas we never had snow. And you find out Spoiler alert for a 30-year-old movie, that Edward Scissorhands is the reason there is snow now. But it, kind of like Batman Returns, there is this take on isolation during the holidays, which I think with COVID, a lot of people really might relate to. And actually, speaking of superhero movies, the MCU has kind of taken over cinema. So it makes sense that they'd have a Christmas film. So Iron Man 3 was another one where I looked at it and I'm like, okay, you guys are stretching it now. But Rachel Paige, she writes for Marvel, so granted this is part of her job, but she, I think, made a fairly good point where she looked at this and is like, well, if anything, this movie is a Christmas Carol. He is haunted by a literal ghost of Christmas past, meaning a person he kind of screwed over a couple of Christmases ago, and he has to see the error of his ways to become a new person. As she puts it, quote, "We believe Iron Man 3 is a Christmas movie because of the essence of the story revolves around Tony going through hardships and coming out the other side to see the wrongs in his way. That's the spirit of Christmas." And she's tying it definitely to the Scrooge angle. And he definitely, if you watch any of the MCU movies, Tony Stark does have some Scrooge moments in this. So I appreciate that reading, and it should come to no surprise that this was written and directed by Shane Black. Shane Black strikes again. Another action movie that takes place around Christmas. I wonder if we're going to have a threefer with him. We are with Lethal Weapon. And this was one that I just found out was considered a Christmas film this year, with Eric, the director here at the Derry Public Library. I always kind of saw this as just a straightforward action film. But then you look at it and you're like, no, it's kind of got the Die Hard feel where, yes, the action storyline is first and foremost, but there is an undercurrent of family, spending time with the people that are close to you, and using Christmas not just as a backdrop, but using it as a fun set piece to work with. And that's something, Die Hard does as well. It's not just, oh, it's a Christmas party. John McClane has fun utilizing Christmas in taunting the terrorists at Nakatomi Plaza. So before we go any further, I know that if anyone is a horror fan, you might be wondering, hey, where's Black Christmas? Well, I have a whole little discussion about Christmas and horror. So there is a whole specific genre, and I know this because horror is really my specialty, of horror that takes place around Christmas. Fun fact, the 1974 slasher Black Christmas, it not only laid the groundwork for later slashers like Halloween, it was directed by Bob Clark. And if that name sounds familiar, that is because Bob Clark directed A Christmas Story. So we have a college Christmas slasher film filled with one of the most, it starts with one of the most agonizing deaths on screen. And about 9 years later, he goes and makes one of the most wholesome and beloved Christmas films of all time, complete with that, the merchandising with that chair lamp. If that's not a director with range, I don't know what to tell you. But kind of the way Tim Burton minds Christmas as a way to find a little bit of the creepiness in it and more explore the isolation that can come with the holidays. There are plenty of creators who have looked at Christmas and kind of gone the route of, how can we make this scary? Or in many cases, again, if you know some of the darker side of Christmas, creatures like Krampus, you're like, how can we bring the darker side of Christmas back? A great example of that is this film, Rare Exports. This is a Finnish movie that came out in 2010, and it is a great take not only on the Santa myth, but the Krampus myth. And especially as Krampus has kind of become more popular in pop culture lately, if you are a fan of Krampus, I would absolutely say check out Rare Exports. A few years ago, a British film, Anna and the Apocalypse, is a zombie apocalypse that takes place around Christmas and is also a musical. Somehow it all works. There are also some more schlocky entries in this. Elves is definitely not as high-end and well-made as something like Rare Exports or Black Christmas. But there was recently a fairly mainstream horror film called Krampus, again, kind of capitalizing on his newfound pop culture fame. And if you want sort of a creepier side of Home Alone, there's Better Watch Out, where it's like, what if instead of terrorizing home invaders, Kevin McAllister just decided to turn on his babysitter? It's not for everyone, but horror and Christmas isn't for everybody. But horror fans are some of the most passionate fans on the planet, so of course we will find a way to make Christmas our own. Which actually leads me to a great question for 2020. Do we have a new film for the Christmas canon? So I'm not on Twitter. Again, I tend to think social media is terrible, but this was a great point that was made by Zach Budrick. The Thing is a movie about a group of people that don't really like each other, stuck together in a single snowbound location, trying to figure out who has a terrifying infection. Counts as a Christmas movie this year. And honestly, in the year of COVID, and when we're looking at a couple of nor'easters already in December, I think it's fair to maybe accept John Carpenter's The Thing as a part of the Christmas canon, if only for 2020. Hopefully it won't be as real next year. But for me, like, I actually will say, this and The Shining are already considered my snowed-in movies. So it's only one jump away from being considered a Christmas film. And ultimately, what I'm seeing now with fandoms, you know, if you were to ever go on Reddit or just talk to people who grew up not only with television, but with home video and the internet, Christmas is kind of what you make it, and that applies for the films in terms of what you want to watch. If you're not a fan of the Grinch movies, you're like, you know what? I tend to like my Christmas with Batman in it. I'm going to go with Batman Returns, which I think is kind of nice. One of the things I've always liked about film and about genres is there is an elasticity there. You can kind of wiggle around and find something that works for you. I always think that fandom and genres as a whole become less fun and less inventive when we have these very rigid guidelines. I mean, there are some things I'll kind of, you know, pull the plug on, like let's say the David Bowie film, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. It may have Merry Christmas in the title, but that is not a movie you want to watch on Christmas. But I do like this idea of where we're going, where it's just essentially this idea of, I like watching this movie around Christmas. It fills me with the Christmas spirit. Therefore, it is a Christmas movie to me. And I think that's probably the best way to go about it. Rather than just going like, oh, you're just watching Die Hard, or saying Die Hard is a Christmas movie to be edgy. Or, ugh, everyone likes A Christmas Story. That's so boring. I mean, especially in the year 2020, if a movie gives you joy, go ahead and watch it. I'm going to stop the share quickly, and we can go on to questions. All right, so we're still recording. Everyone can go off mute. Do you have any questions or comments, or is there any films that you would like to check out? Oh, everyone's on mute. You can unmute and talk now. We're done.
Did you say there was a zombie apocalypse Christmas movie?
Yes, there is. It is called Anne and the Apocalypse. It came out in 2018 in Britain. I don't think it ever had an official theatrical release stateside, but it did have a home video release, and I believe it's on either Prime or Hulu or both. But it's a lot of fun. The songs are incredibly catchy. They'll stay in your head for a while.
Okay, and it's Anna, you said? The name
Yep.
Anna?
Anna and the Apocalypse.
Okay, all right, you had that on the list, I think, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Again, I am all for the democratization of Christmas films. Because, you know, some of the, I would say, typical ones for me don't do it. I've never been a fan of Elf. It's one where I'm like, I get it. Actually, I was burned out on A Christmas Story for a while, mainly because of that 24-hour cycle on television.
Which version do you like or least like? Or I actually like the black and white version, the English version. You know, back in the, I think it's from the, is it Alistair Sim? I think he's the one that plays Scrooge.
I believe so. That one is good. If I have to say which Christmas Carol is the best, I've got to, again, I'm showing I think I grew up at like a specific point in time. I absolutely love the Muppet Christmas Carol. It's it's one of those, again, you watch it as an adult and you're like, oh my gosh, they actually do an incredibly good job telling the story. It came out, it was a TV film, I believe, but there was a version where Patrick Stewart played Scrooge.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Also, I mean, who doesn't love Scrooged with Bill Murray?
Yeah. Well, he's funny in general, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Actually, it wasn't listed, but there's been a discussion. It's not a Bill Murray film, but it's kind of in the similar vein of Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd.
oh yeah.
Mainly
Yeah.
because of when the third act takes place. But that's one where I'm a little like, maybe.
That's kind of a reach, yeah.
Yeah,
That is a reach. Yeah.
That's my reach one. I mean, but again, ultimately, if it's a movie that makes you feel great during Christmas, then yes, it is a Christmas movie to you.
You can't have kids watching that movie. I mean, it's,
Well, it's like
It's,
it's like a Bad Santa, which is 100% a Christmas movie. It is about Billy Bob Thornton's character kind of finding a heart via the meaning of Christmas, but it's so raunchy. It took a couple of years for it to be accepted into the Christmas canon. And I think because Bad Santa was accepted, it opened the doors for a couple of more movies. We have The Night Before, there's Office Christmas Party. I think that kind of helped rehabilitate Batman Returns as a Christmas movie. You're like, see, you can have weird stuff in your Christmas film.
as opposed to all these Hallmark movies now. I mean, it's that's just a whole another thing.
Those are all, again, a lot of people, for me personally, I think they're all the same, but there are people,
Right, yeah.
for them, they're like, this is my comfort food. And
it's on, they run it for the last 3 or 4 weeks. It'll run till Christmas Day probably, and then
they started running it before October, which, as a person who loves Halloween, I kind of looked at that as a little like, okay, that's offensive. That's too far. But again, it's, I think now, I mean, especially with the internet, there's so many streaming services, there's home video,
they need
there's
content,
so many
yeah.
channels.
Yeah.
Everyone can find something they like. It's not a select few films anymore.
My wife's a craft person. She went into the craft store. There's no more Christmas stuff left. They're putting spring stuff out already. So it's like, are you kidding?
Oy.
It's there's Hobby Lobby. She went, there's nothing left. She says it's all, and people were in there saying, where is everything? Well, because of COVID, everybody's doing crafts and stuff this year. And
Oh my God. Oh, that's
Yeah.
right.
yeah,
Well, and I always just assume crafting takes longer. Therefore, they have to have everything out earlier because people need to get
right, no doubt. But still, it's like, are you kidding? It's not even, it's spring. I mean, but the fact is, I mean, you go to the parking lot's mobbed. I mean, these people, they're going in. It's amazing, and it's not just women. There's kids and men going too.
Oh yeah.
So,
Again, I think
it's
with
just-
this year especially, people are just kind of finding what makes them happy and sticking
yeah.
to it. And again, I kind of look at it as like, hey, Elf is not a Christmas movie I watch, but if you love it, you do
Well,
you.
Imagine this happening 50 years ago when we didn't have the internet and all these channels on television. Imagine what people would be doing back then.
If it was the summer, I think we'd be fine. In the winter, I'm not sure.
Right, exactly. Because it's like,
Drinking.
Oh my God, yeah, a lot of drinking. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, again, as someone who believes the internet was a mistake and has actually kind of read a bunch of things about how like conspiracy theories spread like wildfire during the pandemic, I'm like, maybe it'd be better if we didn't have the internet during all this. But yeah, so does anyone think I missed a Christmas film? That's always one I like to hear. If there's one that completely just like flew over.
I've got
my
a
head.
sort of one.
All right.
One for the horror list, and if it helps, this only just occurred to me like just now. The original homicidal Santa Claus, 1972's Tales from the Crypt.
Oh, that's right. Oh my goodness. Yeah, like for a while horror, like there's a lot of not great stuff in the horror Christmas genre. You got to dig to find some really nice. It's like trying to find the old ornaments, that the really chintzy ones. You've got to dig to the bottom to find, oh, here's a nice one that I can put on the tree. That's how it is with Christmas and horror. You've got Black Christmas, which is good. Rare Exports is great. I think Anna and the Apocalypse is definitely like a great new member of the class. I'd hesitate to call it a classic, it's too new, but there's also, you have stuff like Elves, which is not great, or Silent Night, Deadly Night, which is an incredibly schlocky film, but there are people that love it. And again, who am I, again, in the year of COVID, in the year 2020, who am I to say you shouldn't enjoy this?
Well, that title alone, though, Silent Night, that does not sound like any kind of holiday movie whatsoever. I mean, obviously.
The title is better than the movie, believe me. But it,
So, Todd had something else, didn't he?
What else did you have?
No, because you did say if you want me to go back and make the case a bit more on Batman Returns. So.
Oh, okay. Would you like to, or did I make your case for you?
Well, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but it's just to go a little bit further away. It is the idea, like, at the center of this movie, you have three characters who could all be seen as fundamentally broken individuals. We've got, as we established, Bruce Wayne, who not ever got over the death of his parents. Selena Kyle, who is alone in pretty much every sense of the word. Her family barely pays her any attention. Her therapist, it's like her boyfriend blows her off. Her therapist blows her off. Her boss straight up tries to murder her in the first act. And she essentially snaps as a result of it. And weirdly enough, that's when she manages to find somebody else that she can actually connect to. And then there is Danny DeVito in probably the ultimate role of his career as Oswald Cobblepot, who starts off as he's the scion of a wealthy family. His parents try to murder him on Christmas Day, and he spends much of his life essentially hanging with circus freaks and becoming a murderous sewer mutant.
You know what? I think the better way to describe this movie is it's a Christmas film for goths. And, there's no shame in that, because goths deserve Christmas films too.
So is that, I don't remember seeing that movie. So is that the movie where Danny DeVito looks like a penguin? I mean, is that?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Again, if you would like to Google search that movie, please keep in mind, this was a film marketed to children.
92 was a weird year for trying to sell Batman. The same year, like, ironically, on Christmas Day, they released Mask of the Phantasm, a movie which then it was an animated Batman animated movie with murder, which, yeah, that didn't go over so well trying to sell to kids.
Well, I will consistently hold the opinion that Batman is just not good for children either way. This is about an emotionally stunted man who deals with the death of his parents by going around in a bat costume. That's not the sign of an emotionally healthy person.
Well, I mean,
yeah, Hollywood has to find a way to make another movie to make more, it's all about, trying to find another,
which is unfortunate.
Stretch out the genre, stretch out the name, whatever, yeah. Star Wars, Batman, whatever it might be.
Yeah, actually, well, I'm in the past couple of years, interesting that you bring up Star Wars. Star Wars, for much of its cinematic life, has been the summer blockbuster. It's been the summer tentpole. Released every year that there was a Star Wars film, it was, I think with one exception, it was the highest grossing film of that summer. With the Disney acquisition, probably because Disney wanted to have completely open reign for the summer for Marvel, they shuffled Star Wars to December, and then very quickly Star Wars kind of has become a Christmas thing. And it's interesting how, I mean, especially when you have a just fandom of millions, probably billions of people, how quickly I saw the fandom kind of go into Christmassy Star Wars stuff, mainly because of the release schedule. And I mean, as a Star Wars fan, I am not going to complain. I have a Darth Vader Christmas sweater, but it is interesting to observe how quickly it has gone from a summer blockbuster film to a Christmas blockbuster franchise.
So it's funny you actually mentioned that as far as the Watch Around the Holidays as an association, because I remember for a while growing up, that was like the thing was on Christmas Day, they'd have, I think it was USA was there, they would run the original trilogy back to back to back.
Oh, wow, I completely forgot about that.
So yeah, there were a few years where I kind of had that association just because we'd have that on the background.
Yes, I mean, for me, I had the fairly, like, I had the Charlie Brown and the Grinch shorts were the Christmas movies I absolutely remembered. And now there are people who, they grew up with the Polar Express, which I'm sorry. I'm really too hard on that movie, but that film, those kids don't look like they have anything going on behind the eyes. It's creepy animation for me. But there are people, if I were to tell them, like, oh, the Polar Express is terrible, they're like, what do you mean? I grew up with that. That movie's great. I mean, it's part of getting older, but again, this idea of like, just depending on where you are in a certain age and what is popular at the time, that becomes your Christmas film. We had a conversation with two friends recently who, one, The Muppet Christmas Carol was his favorite Christmas film. He watched it all the time. His partner, who is like 1 or 2 years younger than him, she never really watched it. And because of that, she's like, I have no idea why you consider this to be like such a Christmas movie. And it really does come down to, I just watched it a lot around this time. Again, back to that that generation of people who saw The Wizard of Oz at Christmas time and consider that to be a Christmas movie. It's that for me is the most interesting part of this, is just like how your brain will just completely associate something with a point in time, and then that property becomes associated with Christmas, or potentially like, oh, I always watch this around my birthday. But because Christmas, especially for children, is the big holiday, it's so special, there's so much you remember, you tend to really remember any film that you watched around that point in time, and it becomes your Christmas movie.
Well, it's definitely all about the marketing. I mean, it's however, I mean, Disney, sure, Disney's a marketing machine, but 50 years ago, they people did the same thing. They marketed things, to how they thought, or whatever whatever the thinking was, or whatever.
Oh yeah, well,
it's all.
Oh yeah, and even like it's interesting to watch like what you find in Christmas films now, like especially kind of starting in the late 80s and beyond, though you definitely see the popularity in Christmas films about, dysfunctional families, whereas you watch older Christmas films, they're far more like rose-tinted glasses, idealized families, with a few exceptions. For a film made in 1946, It's a Wonderful Life is, I think, one where this is, I think, a fairly honest film about like, a guy going through a really rough time. But if you watch some, films from the 50s and whatnot, you'll have a fairly like, I guess I would say like a leave it to Beaver type of Christmas.
But isn't that the kind of films Capra made? I mean, he made all kind of feel good movies. I mean,
I would definitely, he made feel good films, but again, I would always say his films had a level of honesty and authenticity to him where it never felt overly saccharine, which is interesting, right? Because when It's a Wonderful Life came out, it was criticized as being saccharine, especially in the face of its direct competitor, which was Best Years of Our Lives, which was considered to be like a very honest look at vets coming back from war. They just looked at this as like, oh, this is nonsense. I mean, I can't think of a film that has actually had, Christmas aside, a better rehabilitation than It's a Wonderful Life. Because if you go back and read the reviews for that, and just, I mean, it had Academy Award nominations, but lost, I think, almost everything. Didn't make its budget back, and was considered to be such a failure, the rights holder didn't even bother to hold on to it. Talk about a second life for a movie.
Somebody back then should have bought the rights for it and just let it,
I think someone has now. Oh, someone just said Christmas Toy is the favorite in our house, which I have not heard of that one. Again, I was raised on the Dr. Seuss stuff.
I find Home Alone, I don't understand. It's a Christmas movie, no doubt, but it's such a dysfunctional family. I mean, it is funny. There's no question about it. I mean, he's just comes from such a dysfunctional family.
Well, I think for a lot of kids, they probably looked at that as like, you know what?
That's my house, right?
Yeah, like that's this idea of like, this is my house. There were kids. I was a kid around the time where we looked at Kevin McAllister and we're like, yeah, I kind of get sick of my family too. And then there's the wish fulfillment of, oh, I wish I lived in a big house and could kind of like create all of these contraptions. Or in me, Lost in New York, this idea of I wish I could just stay at a hotel in New York. This is great.
Yeah, right.
Although reality does come crashing down with the final line of the movie of did you spend inordinate amount of money here on room service? As an adult now, I look at that line and I'm like, yeah, I would have blown my stack at that kid.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But
Oh, Christmas Toy is a Muppet movie. Okay, well, I mean, nothing bad ever comes from the Muppets.
no,
The Muppets is the apex of our cultural creations, in my opinion.
it's had a long life. I mean, look at it. But it's had a long life, the Muppets. I mean, it's been around for how long? I mean,
Oh,
it's still going
absolutely.
strong.
And I think they've stayed very true to like their brand and their sense of humor. Which I would say if you have not seen the Muppet Christmas Carol, go back and watch it. It is not just a good Muppet movie, it is a really good adaptation of that story. And I remember parts of it actually freaking scaring me when I was younger.
Really?
Yeah, I'm blanking. The two old men who banter to
Waldorf
each
and
other.
Statler.
Thank you. They make an appearance as like the ghosts who are like, you're going to receive a visit. They look kind of frightening in chains.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, do you know what the plot to Holiday Inn is? The plot to Holiday Inn, it's more from what I remember, it's about two entertainers. It's really more of a showcase because you have Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire. So it's like White Christmas where it's like there is a plot of like, stuff going on in the background, but it's really it's made mainly to showcase two very talented men.
Wasn't it really about it was a ski lodge and there was no snow.
Yeah.
And that's why the song "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas" because they need snow because they
Yep.
weren't making any money
And what's interesting is everyone associates that. They immediately think, oh, it's from the movie White Christmas, but no, it was written for Holiday Inn. I believe won the Academy Award for Best Song that year. And Irving Berlin wrote a new version for White Christmas, I think with a few lyrics or arrangements changed. But I think I've only seen White Christmas once. It's really, both of them are made to be more showcases for the talent, which a lot of sort of movie musicals were in the 40s and in the 50s. They were kind of light on plot, heavy on the showcasing, which nothing wrong with that. But so I have always it's like kind of hard to explain the plot to those because it's like it's paper thin. It's how do we get from scene A to scene B? And in Holiday Inn, if you watch it on Turner Classic Movies, you will see it unedited. Depending on where else you see it, there is a song, I believe it's Abraham, where someone performs in blackface. And again,
wow,
1942, it was considered okay. As I prefer to say it, we know better now.
Yeah, you couldn't even do that now, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I think the closest, we discussed this last month, the closest you could get is Tropic Thunder, and that's because Tropic Thunder was mocking the whole concept. But if you watch, I think most stations, when they air it, they're just like, we're just not going to have that scene in there. But Turner Classic Movies, because they are fairly, devoted to the idea of film history, they're like, we show this unedited. I think they just put in a, beware, you're going to see something pretty outdated here. But it is, if you kind of like musical reviews, these are fun movies.
Oh, my mother used to love those. I don't get musicals. It's like you said, all of a sudden and everybody breaks out in song and dance. It's like, are you kidding? But it's entertainment. First of all, that's what movies are. They're entertainment. And
so if anyone has any more questions or suggestions, we can wrap up for the night. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope everyone does have a good Christmas or good whatever holiday season, whichever you're celebrating right now. Some people celebrate multiple holidays this time of year. And I do hope to see you guys next month for Films of the Atomic Age. Granted, a lot of this is going to be me talking about how much I love the film Testament and Miracle Mile. But there's some interesting, like going through some of these movies, it's interesting to see how Hollywood processed the atomic fear in the 50s versus the 80s, because people started to get a lot more scared in the 1980s.
Liz, can you do me a favor? I have a 9:30 appointment tomorrow morning for the computers and I can't make it. Could you cross my name off?
Oh, okay. I will do
Thank
that.
you very much.
So if we're all set, thank you for coming, everybody.
Thank you very
Great.
much. Thank
Great.
you.
Take care, Liz. Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye, you too.